So now let's talk about all the Easter eggs that were in this crossover episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds and Star Trek Lower Decks titled Those Old Scientists. And I'm pretty sure that they reference every single Star Trek series in this episode. So I'm kind of going to count them out as I list them off, so you can check them off at home as well. The title of the episode, Those Old Scientists, comes from a quote from Lower Decks character Commander Ransom from their Season 1 finale, No Small Parts, in reference to the era in which Captain Kirk was active in Starfleet. This turn of phrase abbreviates to TOS, which is also what Star Trek fans call the original series, and at times this era of Star Trek. So let's just call this the first reference in this episode to Lower Decks. I know that having two characters from Lower Decks literally references the series, but come on, we're just having some fun here. In the first scene of this episode, you can briefly see the poster of number 1 within Boimler's things. This is referenced later on and then featured at the end of the episode. Let's just say that this is the part of the episode where they first reference Star Trek Strange New Worlds. So far, we've referenced Lower Decks and Star Trek Strange New Worlds just in the very first scene. Boimler mentions that Pike's Enterprise is technically the second Enterprise. This could mean one of two things. He could be referencing the Jonathan Archer-led NX-01 Enterprise shown in the series Star Trek Enterprise, or he could be referencing the fact that Pike is the second captain of the NCC 1701 Enterprise after now Admiral Robert April. On the surface of the planet, Rutherford uses a very large holographic imager. This device does look like the same camera that the EMH Doctor used many times on the USS Voyager, possibly most notably in the 5th season episode Latent Image. And here we have our first reference to the series Voyager. Boimler and Mariner reference the Starfleet History Museum, which is probably the Fleet Museum that played a big part in the 3rd season of Star Trek Picard and is probably currently storing the remnants of the Enterprise D so that LaForge can one day restore it. This is of course a reference to the series Star Trek Picard, so now we've referenced that series as well. When Boimler gets sucked into the time machine, he screams, "Remember me," which is a hilarious and very meta reference to the TNG episode Remember Me. The reason I say this is because while Dr. Crusher does get sucked into a vortex in almost the same way that Boimler does in this episode, she doesn't ever say the words "Remember Me." So Boimler is actually referencing the title of a TNG episode to the situation at hand, and this would be the first reference back to The Next Generation. The Strange New Worlds opening sequence has been animated for this episode and is almost a shot-for-shot remake, except for at least two things that I noticed. One is that the same alien that has attached itself to the Cerritos in their opening sequence is also attached to the Enterprise at various times and even falls off. Also, in the final shot, you can see the koala that rules the universe from the Lower Decks episode Mining the Mind's Mines. Planet Setlik 2 is mentioned and is where the Enterprise is set to deliver some grain to. This planet is probably close to Cardassia, since Setlik 3 is where Chief Miles O'Brien became known as the hero of Setlik 3 after Cardassia attacked a Federation outpost there and was part of the reinforcements that fought them off. So technically you could say this is the first reference to Deep Space Nine, since this event is referenced in that series. Number 1 and Pike examine Boimler's Starfleet badge and see that it is also a communicator. The first Starfleet Delta badge in canon that is shown to have been able to also work as a communicator was actually on Star Trek Discovery, but they were the black badges designed by Section 31, so this is our first reference to Star Trek Discovery. When Boimler wakes up, he says, "Computer end program." This is because he thinks he is on a holodeck, which were not developed yet by Starfleet, and also not shown on screen until the first episode of The Next Generation. Before Boimler jumps on the saddle in the Enterprise conference room, he says, "Riker!" This is a reference to the Riker maneuver, and I'm not talking about the one from the film Insurrection. I'm talking about how Jonathan Frakes is tall enough to throw his leg over the back of a chair before sitting on it, much like how Boimler throws his leg up on the saddle. Boimler states that he is on the Enterprise 1701-0. This confirms that the Enterprise was the first ship in Starfleet given the A, B, C designation, and is probably why we have not seen that many other ships with this type of naming convention. Spock's pet Sahat is mentioned by Boimler and is a Vulcan version of a Klingon targ, a pet that seems too dangerous for a child to play with. This animal was first mentioned by Amanda Grayson in the original series episode Journey to Babel, and was seen on screen in another time travel episode, that being the animated series episode titled Yesteryear. After Mariner arrives, she tells Boimler that she was worried he was stuck in a strange dystopian San Francisco. This is a reference to the DS9 episode Past Tense, in which Sisko, Bashir, and Dax all get trapped in 1990 San Francisco during an event known as the Bell Riots. Jack Quaid is able to replicate the walking style that his character exhibits on the animated series, and this is just impossible to describe. You just have to see it on screen. He walks with his arms up, and his back is straight. It's just really odd. While looking for an answer, Uhura studies Bajoran and Cardassian languages. This is significant because during this time period, the Federation knows little about these two cultures, but they will become the linchpin of an enormously important event known as the Dominion War during the series Deep Space Nine. In the bar, while trying to blow off some steam, Ortegas mentions Nausicaans in a game known as Damjat. This predator-looking species was introduced during the Next Generation, and a group of Nausicaans stabbed then Cadet Jean-Luc Picard in the heart after playing Damjat, event shown in the Next Generation episode titled Tapestry. When Pelia gives Boimler advice, she says that an old friend once told her, "I always pretended to be someone I wanted to be until finally I became that someone, or he became me." This quote comes from actor Cary Grant, who lived from 1904 to 1986 and was one of the most famous actors on the planet in the 30s and 40s. While Boimler is sneaking around a shuttlecraft, he yells, "Holy Q!" Afterwards, Mariner says, "Don't yell Q, they haven't met him yet." They had kind of a Trey thing going on. This is referencing, of course, Jean-Luc Picard's greatest enemy outside male pattern baldness, Q, who has been played by John Delancey since his first appearance in the pilot episode of TNG, Encounter at Farpoint. Trey is a character who showed similar abilities to Q in the original series episode titled The Squire of Gothos, which has led many Trek fans to presume that Trey is in fact a member of the Q. This comment by Mariner may not only be a reference to this, but also confirmation that this is not the case, since she refers to both as separate entities. At one point, members of the USS Enterprise geek out over their knowledge of the NX-01 Enterprise. They mention the space grappling hooks featured throughout that series that are what ships used before the invention of the tractor beam. Ortegas also reveals that Travis Mayweather is an inspiration, which makes sense since he was the pilot of the Enterprise as she is now. Uhura mentions her admiration for Hoshi Sato, another main character from Star Trek Enterprise, who's also known for creating the first universal translator. Boimler reveals to Number One that she's become synonymous with the phrase ad astra per aspera, which besides being the title of the second episode this season, was also the motto of the United Earth organization that directly predated Starfleet. It was revealed in that episode of Strange New Worlds that the phrase, among other things, was what inspired her to join Starfleet. And during the time of Lower Decks, the phrase, along with Number One's likeness, is now being used to inspire thousands of others to also join Starfleet. I also thought it was funny that Number One was disturbed to think of herself as a pinup model on a poster, since Rebecca Romijn, the actress who plays the character, began her career as a model and was plastered on a lot of young men's walls as the character Mystique from the X-Men films. I'm not saying I had a poster of her, but I had a poster of her. Commander Ransom states that Number One is the hottest first officer in Starfleet history. Not only is this the first time I think Ransom has said that someone is better than him, but this is also a very sweet way to compliment his wife in the real world, since the actor who voices Commander Ransom, Jerry O'Connell, is the real-life husband of Rebecca Romijn. Those were all the Easter eggs that I found, but let me know if I missed any. I'm sure I missed one or two because there was a lot to go over, but let me know what Easter eggs were your favorite, and did I miss any in my rundown? Hey everyone, Eric here. Thanks for joining me, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. This was taken from my weekly podcast, WDIM News, which you can catch each Monday on this channel. If you would like to check out the full podcast, you can do so by clicking on this video here. Make sure that you not only hit the like button to help support me, but also hit the subscribe button so that you know when my new videos come out. Thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you next time on What Did I Miss?